All right, I want to just take this opportunity since it is the weekend and I'm probably going to forget about it later. There was a viewer who asked me last week about my thoughts on the North Korea situation, and I have to confess that I do have sort of ambivalent feelings about whether a war would be a good idea or not. Here's the deal. In previous generations, meaning the generations since 1945, a war on the Korean Peninsula may not have been as significant of an issue as it is today. The reason is that until like probably the late 80s, Korea was a little bit backwards in terms of industry and its effect on the world economy. And it's speaking both North and South Korea. What's happened since then? The largest shipbuilding companies are in South Korea. So are some of the biggest electronic companies, Samsung and LG. You have Kia and Hyundai, which are large automakers now, and people laugh at them, but those industries they're just growing and growing. South Korea is a symbol of the success of just this country's attitude, the nation of Korea, and I actually read a lot about it. And for us to go to war would probably end up sacrificing a great deal of them, and well, literally them in the form of people. A lot of them would die in that war. Um, they would just remember North Korea has a lot of conventional weapons pointed at the South, and they don't care. They will kill as many people as they need to. I hate communism, as you probably know, if you've already viewed my channel at all. Um, and I'm not using this episode as just a sounding board for you guys. I kind of turned it private, and there's not gonna be any chat. But basically, my stance on North Korea is that it is a blight on humanity. You don't have a greater case for why we need civil liberties and freedom of speech, freedom of movement, uh, you know, consumer choice, all the things that we take for granted as a society. You have no greater case than North Korea, meaning that sure, we in America, we have plenty of towns and localities where those are embarrassments and whatever. I mean, I drive through one every day, and yeah, we have a lot of problems with our society, but at the same time, we have the potential for something better, and it's not by design. It's not as if there's somebody on the top in America that's saying, "Oh yeah, we're just gonna fuck up East St. Louis and we're gonna make the rest of the areas." Uh, a paradise. No, the people have the freedom of choice, and that's why these countries that you see command economies, you just see a general misery that cannot be just explained away by blaming the international community. North Korea was said it's been a rogue state since its inception. Okay, and that's why I would like there to be an easy solution that would overthrow that regime and bring some alternative to power there that would actually meet the needs of the people. But it's not as simple, especially since the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And about that, people are often asking, why is it such a real issue? Why is it that, I mean, whose fault is it and whatever? Um, yeah, I think North Korea is now a serious threat to the international order. And it was such a threat to the international order that even Bernie Sanders, who's not known for being a huge critic of socialist regimes, he considered North Korea to be the worst threat to international peace when he was running for president. And that includes ISIS, it includes all the other, I mean, Russia, whatever. Bernie Sanders said that North Korea was the worst. So progressives, if you're paying attention, it's a real problem. And you can't just explain, people are now blaming Donald Trump. I think I saw a headline, Bill Maher was claiming that he's afraid that America is becoming North Korea. Somebody else, who was it? I think Keith Ellison, the deputy chair of the DNC, said that Kim Jong-un of North Korea, the dictator, is behaving more responsibly than Donald Trump. How is he behaving more responsibly? I mean, you actually had Susan Rice. I'll pull it up, but she even said that North Korea was a problem when President Obama was in power. Said here. I'm going to go to Breitbart News because the other sources are kind of leaving out the real problem. But it says Obama National Security Advisor Susan Rice admits U.S. strategy on North Korea nukes build up a failure. And she said, over the course of Obama's 2 terms in office, his administration failed to stop the communist from building its nuclear weapons capacity. You can call it a failure, Rice told CNN. I accept that characterization of the efforts of the United States over the last 2 decades. But she also said other administrations were not able to put a stop to it. The Washington Examiner reported on the interview, noting that Rice served as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and was Obama's top national security advisor from 2013 to 2017. She said each administration is trying to range of measures from sanctions and pressure, cooperation with China, and other methods that we shouldn't speak about on television to no avail. That's funny that she said that because she revealed the whole unmasking issue on TV. So maybe she's learned her lesson or something. The fact of the matter is that despite all of those efforts, the North Korean regime has been able to succeed in progressing with its program, both nuclear and missile. Rice said that's a very unfortunate outcome, but we are where we are, and we now need to decide how to proceed. History shows that we can. He said that, okay, Rice also wrote a commentary published on Thursday in the New York Times that said President Donald Trump should soften his rhetoric and accept a nuclear North Korea. History shows that we can, if we must, tolerate nuclear weapons in North Korea, the same way we tolerated the far greater threat of thousands of Soviet nuclear weapons during the Cold War, Rice wrote. It will require being pragmatic. Last week, the United Nations Security Council voted unanimously to put in place new sanctions on North Korea. In her CNN interview, Rice actually blamed the UN move, coupled with military exercises in the region, as making it almost inevitable that North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un would make threats against the United States and others. Well, the fact of the matter is that Kim Jong-un and his father and his grandfather have been making threats for years. And let's be honest about what policies have enabled nuclear proliferation. Now, the first country to get full nuclear capability was the United States because they were racing against German scientists during World War II. That's why they had Robert Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein and a bunch of other scientists develop the nuclear weapons at Los Alamos in New Mexico. And they developed the first thermonuclear weapons in that period, the ones that were eventually dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And there's been a massive moral debate that's gone on since then, whether that was a good idea or not. I would say that to some extent, that's kind of a judgment that I don't really have the answer to personally. And maybe that's just because I always think in terms of strategy, instead of in terms of morality. So maybe I'm not the person to make that moral judgment. But it definitely let the cat out of the bag. And then what happened under Truman, who was the same person who did use the nukes, was that the Soviet Union acquired the nukes by spying on the United States. So the second sin of this whole experiment was allowing that technology to reach enemy hands, and therefore you ended up having this arms race throughout the Cold War, where 2 countries were competing as to who would have the most sophisticated nuclear weapons deterrent system. And it brought both nations to the brink of nuclear war and the destruction of the entire world in the Cuban Missile Crisis. I believe that was in 1962. So yeah, that was a disastrous undertaking. Now notice the flashpoints of nuclear conflict always seem to occur under Democratic presidents, and I'm not trying to blame this on the Democratic Party, but I see a real problem in the way that they deal with nuclear armaments. You have Roosevelt and Truman developing nuclear weapons. They never get blamed for that, and I don't know if they should be, because that was a strategy tactic that they used in order to basically make the United States the world's top superpower, which they were for long after that, partially because of nuclear weapons. Okay, so that was under Truman and Roosevelt. Roosevelt started the development, and Truman used the actual weapons, and then he actually allowed the Soviet Union to acquire those weapons by not properly keeping the security as it should be at the nuclear facilities. There was the Alger-Hiss spying incident, and I think the Rosenbergs as well. So the next important president was the next Democratic president, John F. Kennedy, got into the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, and then you go to nuclear diplomacy has always been a little more successful, a little more. I'm not going to say that they've done great strides under Republican presidents, and I don't know why. I think that it should be the opposite. It doesn't make any sense to me. President Carter signed the Strategic Arms and Limitation Treaty with Leonid Brezhnev in the late 70s, and that helped kind of ratchet down the tensions. But it was really just a word, because the Soviet Union, even though they were compromising on nuclear weapons, they'd already allowed the Chinese to acquire nuclear weapons, and they were using more conventional warfare. I mean, they invaded Afghanistan. They were undermining pro-American and non-communist regimes across the world in the late 70s. That's how you had just this wave of terrorism during the Carter administration, but not only during the Carter administration, before that too, because of the weak U.S. foreign policy after Vietnam. So nuclear weapons, at a certain point, they weren't really the real deciding factor in the Cold War. At some point, because of the mutually assured destruction, the nuclear weapons weren't the main battleground in the Cold War. It was these proxy wars, Angola, South Africa, you had Afghanistan and all that. And then you get to the post-Cold War era, and some people had thought that nuclear war would suddenly recede from the from being a real factor in world events, like the fear had kind of receded. Well, they were wrong about it. First of all, Iraq, despite the belief among a lot of people that they did not have weapons of mass destruction, for many years they were trying to develop weapons of mass destruction, partially because they were always anticipating a massive conflict with Iran, and they were in a conflict with Iran for 8 years. So they wanted that technology in order to be able to threaten their neighbors, Iran, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iraq. They were a nation that had, ambitions for expansion and real power. It's not to say that justifies the Iraq War. I'm just saying that for the record, that's what happened. And regime change over there, I think, by default, you now do not have weapons of mass destruction there. It was still a bad idea to invade Iraq, because it was a tremendous waste, and there's only so much you can accomplish after overthrowing a dictator, and then you have to manage the country. It was a wrong decision. There were other dictators and not even just dictators. Pakistan in the 90s under President Clinton, towards the end of his term, Pakistan and India acquired nuclear weapons. Why? it is because of the lax U.S. Policy towards not nuclear proliferation that these countries eventually reach nuclear capability. And we see now that, President Clinton was a major factor in allowing nuclear weapons to become a threat on the global level. There were, first of all, with Pakistan, there's still a threat because of their relationship with Al Qaeda and other Islamist groups. There's a threat that loose nukes could end up in the hands of a bona fide terrorist organization. So this isn't just an issue of whether the nuclear threat is from a state. I mean, potentially it could be from a private or organizational threat. That's just with Pakistan. Also, technically with Iraq. The Iran nuclear program, people don't know for real how far it is. It could be that they're very close to making a nuclear weapon. It could be that they're several years away, but whatever the case, they have leveraged that threat into making them into a regional power. I think Iran will one day become a threat on a global level. And it's not just because I dislike Iran. I mean, there's plenty of Iranians that I think Iran is home to one of the most intelligent populations in the world. I think they have a very sophisticated society, but at the same time, I'd be stupid to say that they're not a threat on the global level because of the rhetoric coming out of Tehran. They want to nuke a lot of their opponents, including Israel, including the United States. They've threatened to nuke Europe. And people who say, oh, well, we shouldn't be so aggressive towards Iran. Well, those countries are aggressive too. Now, whose fault is that? That's a different question. The question of whose fault it is one of the dumbest that there is. And that's the same thing that's going on right now in North Korea. Whose fault is it that North Korea has a thermonuclear weapon? Well, President Clinton signed a treaty in the 90s that allowed them to, I think it was supposed to disarm them, and eventually they ended up basically reneging on it. Let me see here. I mean, you have here North Korea. This is from 2 days ago, and this is from Newsweek. Newsweek is not a pro Donald Trump. They're actually very much the contrary. It says here, North Korea's nuclear threat isn't really Trump's fault. How Bush, Clinton, and Obama contributed to the conflict. It says President Donald Trump's chosen words in a terse manner as he delivered his threatening message Tuesday to North Korea and its leader, Kim Jong-un, has led to, I don't know if it's Jong-un or Jong-un, use both interchangeably, has led to significant backlash as many worry that the president's rhetoric brings the U.S. closer to war on the Korean Peninsula. But Trump, who throughout his public and now political life has been well known to go off script, most certainly was not the first U.S. president to use such hyperbolic language or threats toward the North or its leader at the time. Indeed, Trump inherited the global threat that is North Korea, not only from his immediate predecessor, Barack Obama, but also from Presidents George W. Bush and Bill Clinton. Notice these are all post-Cold War presidents. And the truth is the country's last three commanders-in-chief have all used various forms of diplomacy, strong language, and even direct communication with North Korean leaders, only to end up making little to no progress. Scroll down, there's a lot of fluff here. So one of the experts that they cite, what's his name? From Fordham University. Just getting a lot of interference here, so sorry. He says because of Trump's somewhat unhinged off-the-cuff rhetoric, North Korea, China, and Russia actually believe a military strike on the North is possible, which in turn led the two other superpowers to agree to the most recent United Nations sanctions against Kim Jong-un's regime. That's a kind of power or leverage Obama's administration didn't necessarily possess or effectively convey. And yet both Obama and Bush had choice words for Kim and his father, Kim Jong-il, within the last 15 years. Obama at first took a conciliatory route, according to Lee, with the North, but ultimately returned to sanctions and tough talk. In April 9, 2014, Obama stated while visiting South Korea that the U.S. will not hesitate to use our military might when it came to defending allies. Now that's actually empty rhetoric, since they have been hesitating. This came around the time the North, which just a few years prior had transitioned from Kim Jong-il to Kim Jong-un, was on the verge of a fourth nuclear test, The Guardian reported. Much like the Trump administration, the United Nations Security Council recently did, one of Obama's last acts to curtail the North from testing and firing off rockets was the same strategy that other leaders have followed: sanctions. So let me go to the Clinton administration. So President Bush also, he was full of empty shit, but nobody cares. In fact, since Trump, nobody has cared what Bush did. So I'm not even going to go over it, but he was definitely to blame as well. And the fact of the matter is that President Bush has retreated mostly from the political scene. So I don't think that there's much you can blame for him. But Presidents Clinton and Obama have not retreated from the political scene. So here, this is what Newsweek says. Like Bush, Clinton too came close to halting the North's nuclear programs in 1994. In October that year, about 3 months after Kim Il-sung died and Kim Jong-il had yet to formally take power, Clinton managed to strike a deal that would give the North oil and promised financing worth $4 billion, with the South, Japan, Russia, Germany, and the U.S. each chipping in, to build light water nuclear reactors that would be constructed in a way to make difficult converting waste into bomb materials. But just weeks later, Republicans historically overtook the Congress in the 1994 elections and would not fork over their appropriations to make Clinton's deal happen, incensing the North. Later, Clinton even toyed with the idea of being the first sitting president to travel to North Korea after Bush had been elected, Lee said. He ultimately decided not to because he thought North Korea being one of the big foreign policy problems, he didn't want to handcuff the new incoming president into a particular course of action. Making a major step like that with North Korea was something for the new president. And that's about it. I'm just looking for the comments right now. Yeah, these people that are criticizing President Trump for what's going on right now, you have to realize that the North Korean government is not going to go away on its own. A lot of foreign policy experts speculated for years that North Korea would collapse inward like the other communist regimes, but they don't understand that they have the perfect geography and the perfect ally to the West, China, that they don't have to respond to the needs of their own people. They can just kill them as much as possible. I mean, they don't have to give any inch of ground. North Korea is really the showcase for total totalitarianism at its most extreme form. It's the most controlled society in human history. And there's a lot of people who go on. I kind of troll the Lionel Nation stream because he's a friend of Calvin Maupin, who is a North Korean apologist. No, I will never accept the North Korea, or we can just say, oh, they're just doing it their own way. Who is they? They are one person who He represents a dynasty. He's basically the leader of a kingdom that it's a kingdom of suffering and slavery. So I'm never going to be one of these people that says, oh, North Korea, we just have to understand where they're coming from. Fuck that. Where we're coming from. Okay? They is basically, and that's why, there's a case for war with North Korea, because they're a country that will eventually, they are going to attack somebody, whether it's Japan or the South or us. So all these people who are kumbaya, whatever, we don't believe that we should start wars or whatever. They believe also in this non-aggression principle, which is one of the reasons that I kind of break with traditional libertarianism. The non-aggression principle means that you have to basically wait until some blatant form of aggression is committed, and then you have to attack. Well, how blatant does it have to be? They never say. Iran has kidnapped U.S. sailors in the past couple years. How come that doesn't violate the NAP? They never say, because in reality, the NAP is always going to be used as an excuse. They'll be like, well, we shouldn't be involved in other nations' affairs. I agree, but not if they do violate the NAP. I mean, the NAP is kind of, it should be taken for granted that you don't attack people that haven't attacked you. But once somebody has attacked you, then fuck the NAP. It doesn't make any sense. And then the whole argument of who started what, fuck that. Once you're in a war, you're in a war. Don't worry about things like the NAP and whatever, because at the end of the day, the objective is to win and to survive at a certain point. It's not to just be ideologically consistent. That's why the libertarian movement is full of a lot of cream puffs, that they don't have real, and especially the Libertarian Party. They have these just a philosophical objection to war, but they couch it in this non-aggression principle, which when you really look at it, it's a fatalist prerogative. I'm going to move on to my next topic, which is going to be civil libertarianism. That's really a topic, I think, that should be the focus of libertarian people throughout the United States. I think it used to be the focus of the left, and they've certainly had a broad departure from that. If the video is still showing, freezes. There's probably a lot of dead air right now. Okay, I'm back. Libertarianism, very important. You need the conservatives to start speaking up for the ideas of the First Amendment and the Second Amendment. Not that they never have been. I'm just saying that it has to be now the flagship of our sector of the public, and possibly, I mean, I think more liberals, and this shouldn't just be a party line thing, and along ideological lines. There should be in the United States this general movement, and I'm hoping that it's going to develop, and I'd be happy to participate to preserve the First Amendment as the most important principle of our society, the American society, and what we represent towards the world. And the same, I mean, a lot of people are very gung-ho about the Second Amendment, which is good. Not everybody agrees on the Second Amendment, but there will be no meaning to the Second Amendment if the First Amendment is not held to be at the very top of our priorities. And I've already said, there's a lot of artists that I think are complete garbage, like Roger Waters. But I still think they need to have the opportunity and the venue and the right, if they're booked, to appear on stage, even if I disagree with their entire philosophy. and I've said the same thing about the BDS movement, which is a totally political movement. I've said I think that they're a garbage movement, but limiting speech does not limit people's beliefs. I mean, people are going to continue to believe in these philosophies, whether you give them the constitutional and legal protections or not. So you might as well give them the space, and then you have the choice to either respond or to ignore, even to insult. But you do not have the right to limit other person's abilities to say that freedom of speech, to express their free thoughts and ideas. And I think that's where the libertarian movement gets it right, but they don't emphasize it enough. They really, if they would go out, instead of pushing this non-aggression principle bullshit, which is that's something that is so, it's such a small issue in our times. If they want to talk about what I mean, they could talk about reducing the defense budget. That's a lot more relatable than this non-aggression principle nonsense. But in terms of freedom of speech, I think there's millions and millions and millions of people that are now seeing it as more important than ever, with all this Google and Facebook and YouTube censorship going on. You could have a lot of people that would be very open to, being members of this civil libertarian movement. The ACLU is very lacking in its just commitment to civil liberties nowadays. They focus so much on things that have nothing to do with them. This is the opportunity for people to really talk about what civil liberties mean in the United States. If you're a citizen in the United States, you should be allowed to express views that are offensive to many people. There's nothing wrong with it, and that's just my observation. I think that a lot of people would rally around this flag, and it would include people from a lot of different backgrounds and opinions. My final one is about independent journalism, and with that I'll close. I spoke earlier, I think last week or the week before that, on the For Real News segment, about the fact that a truly independent media is disappearing today. There's first of all, the mass media, the mass communications media, or mainstream media, as some people call it, independent. It's corporate steered. It's steered by sponsors. It's steered by interests and shareholders, and not by real journalistic integrity. And that's why, whether you're talking about network news or cable news or even newspapers, even to some extent local newspapers, you are getting a controlled feed of content. And there's exceptions. There's journalists out there that they have real integrity. I mean, I think John Stossel, for example, is the one that I would say is the best and least biased reporter. I mean, well, not biased, but the least tainted reporter out there on mainstream media. And he's on Fox Business, I think. I think he's still working for them. But if you look at, beyond that, you have the TYT network. They're not really independent media anymore. They just received this massive investment infusion from a hedge fund. So they're not independent media. They're biased media that now is tainted by corporate association. You need nowadays to redefine what independent media is, and I think that if you look across the internet, there's only a few names that are left that are truly independent. And I'd say Tim Pool is one of them. He's a guy who goes across the world and covers various events, often violent events, and brings back footage, including in the United States. He was at Ferguson and whatever. And he's a pretty liberal person in terms of his political beliefs. So you have people like him. You have H.A. Goodman and Tim Black. They are technically still independent media because nobody's steering them, so far as I know, to cover the stories that they want to. All they do is they open up computer, and they say, you know, today I'm going to cover healthcare, or in the case of Goodman, today I'm going to cover the Clinton scandals. And they do it very well, and they have an established fan base because of that, and it's a growing fan base. So that's what independent media means today. And a lot of the people who can, and I think I try to keep my content independent. I mean, it's not to say that I have a huge audience, but it's still an independent viewpoint, because I choose the topics I want to cover, even if they're ones that nobody else cares about. If I was not independent, it's likely that somebody would be telling me, you know what, this Venezuela topic selling, you're not getting many views, you're not going to get anywhere this way. I'm going to tell you you should cover Lindsay Lohan or whatever it is, and I wouldn't have a choice, or did I acquiesce to him, and whoever would be making this choice, my corporate overlord, and then I would be basically sacrificing my independence, or I could keep my independence, but stand the chance of eventually losing my job, because people would say, well, he's not even listening to direction. He's not bringing the interests of the company forward. So there's very few people left that you can call truly independent media. I mean, there's some people on RT. There was that Lee Camp guy. I believe that he's a leftist. Okay, he continues to promote InfoWars. They continue to promote their own agenda. They're independent in that they are not guided by anybody else, but that does not mean that they have independent views. Their views are very biased and skewed, towards their own view on society, which is fine. I don't think that there's a problem with having an InfoWars or a Breitbart or even a TYT, which I don't consider independent at all anymore. I think they've completely lost their independence. There's going to be a need, by the way, for those of you progressives out there, and I'm getting close to closing, for progressives out there that think that TYT is still a network that is accurately representing the grassroots, no, you are going to need a new network, and it's probably around the corner. It's going to probably crop up pretty soon of true progressive independent journalism, and TYT is basically setting itself up to become the new corporate establishment media of the progressive movement. It's not going to be exactly the same as CBS News or what's it called, MSNBC, which is openly liberal, but it's definitely not going to be independent. They're going to be representing the interests of their partners. I think Al Jazeera is even a partner of theirs, and they're going to be shilling for them. And some people are going to get tired of it, and they're going to migrate to a different platform that represents progressivism in a more pure sense. And there already are people that are talking about it. There's the Sane Progressive, Debbie, I forgot her last name. People that I disagree with fundamentally, but I think that they need a forum to give them the attention and the voice that because there's plenty of people that agree with them. I talked to some of those people, and this is where we're headed. We're headed for a very big diversification of thought in the United States, and this Google and YouTube censorship is going to stunt it, but it's not going to stop it. You're going to have this spilling out eventually, and there's nothing they can do about it, because it doesn't matter where, people are going to find the venue where they can get this done, whether it's YouTube or VidMe or wherever it is. So I'm going to publish this soon. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, this is Ramon with Bold Like a Leopard. And thanks for tuning in.